Bonsoir and good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Catherine Spencer-Ross, and I'm president of Heritage Ottawa and chair of its lecture series committee. Welcome to this evening's lecture. First, I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa is at the heart of a vast homeland whose history reaches back long before the development of the National Capital Region as we now know it. For hundreds of years, Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples have been pressing for their Indigenous rights to be respected and their history to be understood. Heritage Ottawa makes efforts through our programs and partnerships to bring awareness to Algonquin history and heritage with events and programming. Our free lecture series is made possible with the generous support of our leadership sponsor, Sandy Smallwood and Andrex Holdings, and of Merkley Supply Limited. We are also grateful for grants from the City of Ottawa and the Province of Ontario. I'd like to thank those of you who are members and those who have made donations to Heritage Ottawa and encourage this great way to support our work. Please visit our website at heritageottawa.org for details. At the end of this evening's presentation, we will have a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Heritage Ottawa volunteer Leslie Maitland. Thank you, Leslie, for taking on this role. Feel free to type your questions or comments in the Q&A dialog box at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to as many as possible afterwards. Our presentation this evening could be entitled The Prequel to 24 Sussex. Some of you may remember that in February 2024, Heritage Ottawa presented a panel discussion on the future of 24 Sussex, the official residence of Canada's Prime Ministers since 1952. The presentation is available on the Heritage Ottawa YouTube channel. As a final act by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he asked the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada to develop options for an official residence of the Prime Minister, bringing the future of 24 Sussex back into the spotlight, if only for a brief moment. Well, tonight we're going to forget about that building, and we're going to learn about the different places where Prime Ministers used to live before there was an official residence. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Hagit Hadaya is a longtime friend of Heritage Ottawa, and we're delighted that she is joining us this evening. Hagit holds a Master of Canadian Heritage Conservation and a High Honours BA in Architectural History, both from Carleton University. Since the completion of her formal education, she's been researching, writing, and lecturing on a variety of topics dealing with Canadian architectural history. Hagit is also a published author. Many of you will know her two books, In Search of Sacred Space, Synagogue Architecture in Ottawa, published in 2013, and At Home with the Prime Minister, Ottawa Residences of the Prime Ministers prior to 1952, published in 2017. The latter forms the basis of this evening's presentation and was published with the assistance of Heritage Ottawa. If you would like to purchase these books, please contact us at info@heritageottawa.org and we'll pass your message to Hagit. Finally, and fittingly, Hagit served for 2 years on the National Capital Commission Advisory Committee on the Official Residences of Canada. Thank you, Hagit, for expanding our understanding of housing for our Prime Ministers. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. And I'm going to try and share my screen and hopefully everything will work properly. Thank you so much for attending this lecture. I'm really pleased to be here. As Catherine said, the presentation is going to be based on the book, and this is the cover of it. And before I start, I just wanted to point out that before Borden, the prime ministers were actually known as premiers, and it was only in the 20th century that they became prime minister. To make it easy or more smoothly, I'm going to use the term prime minister for everybody from the very beginning. But you will notice in some of the articles, the headline will say premier. So just to know that they are talking about the prime minister and not the premier. So Now, the book covers 12 prime ministers because Salwa was the first one to move into 24 Sussex. Of course, because of the time constraints, I cannot cover 12 prime ministers and all their homes because this is some of the homes they lived in. Some of them, some prime ministers lived in the same houses, so there is an overlap, but there's still way too many of them. So I've cut them down a little bit and chose few prime ministers to talk about, and hopefully I hope it makes sense somehow. They're not going to be chronological, and you'll see there is a reason for the choices that I made. So before I start, I'm just putting this on just to give you an idea. First of all, about the age of the prime ministers, which I thought was quite interesting, the marital status in the profession, and before. When they started coming to Ottawa as ministers, they weren't given any allowance for additional housing, and some of them who were married had to keep a house going in their in their hometown and their riding because their wives did not come with them necessarily to Ottawa. They only were here for about 4 months of the year, so they stayed in boarding houses, hotels, and eventually they did move their family to Ottawa. So at that point, the housing situation changed, and whether they had money or not, they always complained that they had no money. And especially once they became prime minister, they still did not have an allowance for entertaining. So they were really short of money sometimes. Some of them were wealthy and on their own accord, so they weren't as but they still complained. I found no matter what, complaining was a good thing to do. So I'm actually going to start with the second Prime Minister, Alexander Mackenzie, rather than Mr. John A. MacDonald. And please don't confuse him, as a lot of websites do, with Sir Alexander Mackenzie, the explorer. There were so many websites that I go to and actually ask them to change the pictures. So Alexander Mackenzie was a very humble man. Oops. And he actually turned down the knighthood 3 times. He just felt that it wasn't a democratic thing to do, and he did not want to have it. He did not want the title. Um, and he was also quite humble in a lot of other ways, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. I just wanted to put this picture on of Wellington Street of 1874, and this is the Ottawa that Alexander Mackenzie came to. And as you can see, the whole street, this is what the intersection looks like, just in case you were wondering. And it was a combination, a mixture of housing and businesses, and as you can see the churches, you can see the steeple in the background, and this is the gate on the corner of Bank Street, where the entrance is to Parliament Building. And he was, as I mentioned, he was quite a humble man, and his office was in the West Block, but he felt that he didn't want people asking him for any kind of favors. When he first came to Canada, he worked as a stonemason in Kingston, and he was cheated out of his earnings at one point. And he felt that no person should get anything if they didn't work for it or did not deserve it. So he built the tower to put his office at the top, so he could actually slip out from the side entrance, avoiding any kind of people lobbying for any sort of favors from him. And this is Mackenzie Tower now. It was refurbished not very long ago. And this is the staircase that takes you up to his office. So it was quite narrow, and I would love to see this staircase one day. I'm still hoping. His home was not very far from the West Block. It was on Wellington and the corner of Kent. There was a row of buildings, and and he lived in one of them. Unfortunately, on the night of June 10th in 1874, there was a fire in the building, and he happened to be in residence. So as you can see from the headline, the premier residence was destroyed. He went out and he helped with the firefighting because it was very rudimental at that point. We didn't have a proper firefighting force in Ottawa, and basically you passed a lot of buckets of water. And and he did manage to save some of the furniture. Unfortunately, he didn't save any of this. He lost the papers and letters. And as researchers, of course, that's what we would have liked him to actually save rather than the furniture. But nevertheless, this is what happened. And so he moved. Obviously, he had to move, and he didn't move all that far because, as you can see, Kent and Wellington, you can see the row of houses where he used to live, and he moved to 22 Victoria, which is this very handsome stone house overlooking the Ottawa River. He and his wife lived here, and he loved going out and walking along the paths to see watch the river. And the house was always open to whoever wanted to come. They were very welcoming to anybody. He was a teetotaler. He was Baptist, but anybody who came could have a hard liquor or any kind of refreshment they want. They were very accommodating in that respect. And once he lost the election, the house was rented, so he just left. However, before they left, apparently, and he wrote to his daughter Mary, and I found one of the things about Alexander Mackenzie. I found his letters very informative. I found him a bit of a gossip. He would tell his daughter about everything and anything that was happening in Ottawa, which is, as I said, that's why we like the letters. And I'm sorry too that he's lost so many of the earlier ones. And one of the things he wrote that apparently Tupper and his wife came to look at the house while Mackenzie and his wife were out. And apparently Mrs. Tupper went into the closet and looked inside uh, everything. And then she tried to persuade the cook to come and work for her. And the cook said, if I don't work for Mrs. Mackenzie, I'm not working for anybody. So they left. And Charles Tupper moved into the house with his wife. And so it's a house. Prior to living at 22 Victoria, Tupper lived, when he first moved his wife and family to Ottawa in 1870, he lived on Daly Street at 274. It was quite a big house, as you can see. And but he was, by profession, he was a doctor. And apparently the kids used to love going to the trash to try and find a little bottle of medicine that he would discard. These days you can pass by the house. It has changed a little bit. It has been subdivided into apartments. But nevertheless, if you do happen to go into the lobby, there is a big picture of Tupper on the wall, reminding you that that was his house. The next house he lived in was on Metcalfe Street. And again, he moved his practice, and he was a practicing doctor. And so he hung his shingle at 104 Metcalfe Street. And that was between Maria Street, which now is Laurie and Slater, which is where the public library basically is now, the main branch of the public library is. Then he moved to 22 Victoria, and then Victoria, and afterwards he moved to 123 Cooper Street, and that's where he lived when he was prime minister. For the 69 days he was prime minister, he managed to do that. And I've tried high and low to find a picture of that house, and I just could not find anything. However, when I was at the Bytown Museum last year, they have these dioramas on the third floor, and I circled it, and you actually see the house as in 3D. I'm trying to find out where they have, like, they found the pictures or the floor plans to actually build this little model, but so far, I haven't done it. No luck there. So, but we do have a description of the house. I'd like to mention that Thompson actually put the house for sale without telling his wife he was doing so, and he moved to England with the wife. She moved with him, and he did leave the house for sale with the agency, and it gives you a good description of the house. And it has a large parlor, dining room, and billiard room, 12 bedrooms, stable and coach house. So it was really quite a massive house. So when I was saying that they were complaining about not having money, obviously they still had money to live in such substantial homes. And as I mentioned, he wasn't prime minister for very long. And this is the closest I could get to a picture of what the streetscape would look like in Scotia and Somerset. Behind the tree on the right-hand side, the house would be there, but obviously the leaves are not helping very much. In case you're wondering what happened to the house, even though it was recognized as of importance both on the city level and federal level, they did allow to the house to be demolished and for the Embassy Hotel to be built. So this is what we have now. So now I'm going to digress a little bit to Sir John A. Macdonald, not because of the houses that necessarily, but to mention that he died in office on June 6, 1891. And he used to live at Earnscliffe at the time, which was quite a substantial house again. And it was constructed for John Mackinnon between 1855 and 57 for himself and Annie Mackay, who was the daughter of Thomas Mackay. And when he died, he did move in there in 1883, and he died there in 1891. And this is the house on the day of the funeral. There's this book that came out fairly recently called The Lost Prime Ministers, and that the author mentions one of the things St. John, one of his failures was to never anointed a clear successor. There was confusion and was going to follow him, and the forerunner was actually Sir Thompson, but unfortunately was a Roman Catholic, and that prevented him from becoming the prime minister at the time. He will later become prime minister, but not after Abbott passed away, and Abbott was declared put into office as the prime minister, and he mentioned that he was chosen because he was not particularly obnoxious to anyone. Words to live by, if that's how you get to be a prime minister. And after MacDonald died, Lady Laurier actually moved away. She went to England. She didn't want to stay there, so she rented the house. And in one of the letters that she wrote to Pope, who was Sir John A. Macdonald's secretary, it's a wonderful letter because she mentions that he lived in the house. Abbott, it is, lived in the house from July 2nd to October the 8th, and that he didn't pay the rent. He was there for 3 months and he didn't pay the rent. Also, she complained that she didn't want to pay for the coal he used and the wine he drank. So obviously he was there, but I'm not sure how the whole thing was settled, if the payment was made, but nevertheless, as I mentioned, Abbott did live in the prime minister's, in Sir John A. Macdonald's house. And then, according to the Montreal Gazette, it said that he secured the lease on the resident on Victoria Street, with the 22 Victoria, which was the home of Alexander Mackenzie and Charles Stapper, and he was going to move his family. However, his wife is not well, and she was elderly, and he himself was in his 70s by the time he became prime minister, and she decided she wasn't going to move. So he stayed in Ottawa on his own, and he did not live at 22 Victoria. I'm just putting this area, this map, to show you the area where the house was. And you recognize it today as the area where the Supreme Court of Canada is. And there were a lot of houses in that area. Some of them were quite substantial. Some of them were a little more modest, but nevertheless, there were it was covered with homes. And all the buildings were expropriated in 1912 in view to construct the Supreme Court of Canada. This is some of their other houses. As I mentioned, some of them were quite modest, and but nevertheless, there were people's homes. And then finally, when they started constructing the Confederation building on the east side of the lot, they started demolishing. And if you look to your left, that's the house that's 22 Victoria as it was being demolished. So here we have a home that almost became the home of 3 prime ministers, and it's gone. So what did Abbott do? He used to spend most of his days at work, and then he would go to the Widow Club, which some of you might have seen. I moved to Ottawa once after it was burned, so I've never seen the original building. You see it to the extreme right of the screen, and he used to spend his time there. And as you can see, he used to play whist and chess. And at about 9 o'clock, he retired to the Victoria Chambers, where he had an apartment. And the Victoria Chambers started its life as the Victoria Hotel. And it was said that it was actually built specifically to house the Prince of Wales, Edward VII, when he came to lay the cornerstone of what was then the legislative houses, because we were pre-Confederation here, and that's where we stayed, and that was the claim to fame to the Victoria Hotel. I've circled it, as you'll see where it was located, which is right across from Parliament Building, and it was very handy spot for the Prince of Wales to stay while he was visiting Ottawa. And in January of '67, the hotel was sold, and it was reopened a year and a bit in September of 1868, and it was advertised as the first class hotel. The first class hotel with large windows. And you're going to notice as I'm talking, every time anybody reopened the hotel, it was always the most up to date of anything. So I guess in 1868, it was the most updated of the hotels you can get in Ottawa. And it did go through some alterations, mainly on the outside. It was a very little bit, as you can see, it was mainly on the roof level that the changes happened. And by the 1880s, it changed name to the Victoria Chambers, and it was advertised as room to let, good office bedroom furnishing, furnished or unfurnished, and conveniences, elevator, bathrooms, and terms reasonable, and it was about $7 or $10 a month to stay at the hotel, so it was fairly reasonable. However, when I did find these floor plans, which dated to 1891, which was the time that Albert would have been at the hotel. And if you look very carefully, actually the bathroom, a shared bathroom. And I was kind of wondering how a prime minister would feel about staying in a place where he had to share bathrooms. But nevertheless, that was, I just thought, I hope he had his own bathroom. Let's put it that way at the end of the day. I put these 3 slides on across, so you can see how the changes happened. And if you look very carefully, as I said, the changes happened mainly on the roof level. The rest of the building stayed fairly much the same as it was when it was first started. And then it went downhill, as most hotels will do. And eventually in 1926, the last of the residences vacated, and the Victoria Chamber building, as we know it today, went up. It was designed by Albert Hayward, and it was built between 1927 and 1928, and the building is fairly much the same as it was at the very beginning. So the next prime minister I wanted to talk about was Sir Mackenzie Ball. I find very few, not all of us remember him. He was one of the 4 prime ministers that succeeded Sir John A. Macdonald without actually being elected. And as you can see from the picture, he actually was described as the grumpy Santa. and but and he stayed, basically being a widower. His wife died in 1884. He stayed at a Russell House Hotel, and I'll be talking about that in a few minutes. I wanted to talk about Ball first because I found him a very interesting person. Because, as I said, he looks very grumpy, and yet he must have been quite tender. Because when his wife died, he said, "Oh, there goes my heart." And they had 9 children together. So somehow I think he was not grumpy all the time. And he was very impetuous. And he met this woman from Napanee by Mrs. Stevenson. And upon his second meeting with her, he proposed marriage. And his daughters were not very happy about him getting married because they felt they were used to act as hostesses on all his functions. And they told him that women in Apani, and I quote, were loose and he shouldn't be marrying her. Apologies to all the women in Apani. However, about a week before the wedding, he canceled it. And her father wrote him a letter saying, like, why did you do that? And he said, ask your daughter, she knows. She never divulged information, so we don't know what happened and why he canceled the wedding, but nevertheless, that's the reality. Now, the Russell House Hotel had this beginning as the Campbell House in 1845, and it was at the corner of Elgin and Sparks, very close to Wellington and where the Parliament buildings are. And people used to come, it was sort of a second Parliament because people would come and meet there. And the original building was a 3-story building with tin house. It was quite, you can see it on the corner there. And it actually was a small establishment at the time. It did additions were made to it, and then it became the Russell House, and in 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 85, and this is in 1875, sorry. And here you can see the original house, the building, the 3-story building with the gable roof and tin gabled roof and tin roof, and the extension to the right of it. So it did extend quite a bit. And apparently the restaurant there was quite good, and they had a special well for water, so they could get fresh water there as well, which was very important. Not everybody in Ottawa had that luxury. In 1880, the building underwent major renovations and extensions, and you can see the original part of the building, which was the Campbell House, was demolished, and it was an ownership moved to Mr. James Gauguin and Francois Javier Saint Jacques, and from Quebec City, and they were in charge on rebuild. They were the ones who rebuilt the Russell House, and this was the final product. And as you can see, it was very big, and it covered basically the whole block. And of course, as I said, whenever they reopened a new hotel, this hotel advertised that the interiors are the state of the art, and of improvements that were made, that were to be found in the hotel. And apparently they had a system where you can actually, it wasn't quite a telephone, but they had tubes where you can actually talk to other people at the hotel without going through a reception, not receptionist, but whatever. You know what I mean. So an operator, that's the one. Sorry about that. So, Mr. Ball moved in 1886, and he's known as the longest he held the record for continuous residence in the hotel for 17 years, and he was there when he was prime minister. Other people who lived in other future prime ministers who lived in the hotel were Borden and Laurier. And if you ever get a chance, if you want to know a lot more about life at the Russell House, you should read Laurier in Love, because it tells you the story. It covers the time that Laurier and Zoe lived and stayed at the Russell House, and also Mrs. Lavigny. And I'm not sure if you know about the tangle between the Laurier and Mrs. Lavigny, but I'm not going to go through this now because that's a long story. So read the book. And the hotel itself, from the pictures, looked very elegant. It was quite, and I guess for the time it was state of the art of the interior. And the dining room is, as you can see, is quite well appointed. The downfall of the Russell House happened when the Chateau Laurier opened in 1912, and that was prompted the deterioration of the Russell House, because people preferred staying at the Chateau Laurier rather than the Russell House Hotel, and it was slated. The last guest checked out in 1925, and it was slated for demolition. However, in April 14, 1928, there was a big fire, and that solved the problem of the demolition because it basically destroyed the building. And just to give you an idea, this is where Confederation Square is, and they extended the whole area, and we have Confederation Square as we know it today. And since I mentioned the Chateau Laurier, I'm going to go back to that because the original Chateau Laurier was designed by Ross and McFarland from Montreal, and as I mentioned, it opened in 1912. And as you notice, the Chateau Laurier had already. Will have an extension because we sometimes forget that it was extended at one point. But it was home for, it became home of Mr. Bennett. And Mr. Bennett was a bachelor. He was very well-to-do, and when he first was quite young, as you can see, he was a very slim man. But he said that in order to gain respect from other people, he had to be big. So he worked at gaining weight. And a man after my own heart, he used to eat a pound of chocolate a day. So just to gain the respect of everybody. And in the book, Unusual Heroes actually is referred to as the fat prime minister. Being a bachelor, he used to live in hotel all the time. And when he lived in Calgary, he did stay at the Palliser Hotel for quite a number of years. And this is the interior. Just it was the same sort of hotel as the same caliber as the Chateau Laurier. And when the extension was built in 1929, 1930s, John S. Archibald and John Schofield of Montreal were asked to renovate one of the part of the original building, and the manager wanted 17 rooms to be put together for one unit. And and that's the one that R.B. Bennett lived in. So he moved in on September 17, 1931, and his rent was $400 a month. And just to give you an idea, rent for a family at that time was $27.80 a month. So you can see how much more he paid for it. And he did go into Parliament, and they complained about the fact that he was paying that much, although it was coming out of his own pocket. There was still a discussion about what it is. And he said, well, that's what I was asked to pay, and that's what I'm paying. Once he lost the election, he decided, sorry, just I'm going to show you these two pictures, because if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the awning. So that's where the unit was, his suite was. at the Chateau Laurier, and it's still there, but it's the CN office at the present. And once he lost the election, he was a prime minister during the Depression, and it was not an easy time to be a prime minister. And when he lost, he felt that Canada turned its back to him, and he did not want to stay in Canada anymore. So he moved to England, and he bought a house there, and that's where he lived with his dog Bill. And on June 26, 1947, he was taking a bath and he had a heart attack and he died. And his dog was sitting on the bed sleeping, oblivious to what was happening in the bathroom. And not only Canada turned its back, even his dog didn't seem to care all that much about him. And he's the only dead prime minister that's buried outside of Canada. He just did not want to come back to this country. So, and the next bachelor I thought I'll talk about is William Lyon Mackenzie King. And as you can see, he was quite a handsome man when he was young. And he came to Ottawa in 1900 in July, and to work at the Labor Gazette. And he moved first in some rooms at 202 Maria Street, which, as I mentioned before, became Laurier Avenue. And again, it's very close to where the public library is now, the main branch. And in October of that year, as I mentioned, he arrived in July. In October, he moved into the lodging at that house. In October of that year, his friend from university, and he was known as Bert, moved to Ottawa. And he was quite a handsome guy too. And the two of them got together, and he moved to the same house so they can live in the same spot. And being the good-looking bachelors they were very much sought after in Ottawa. Things changed a little bit later on, but that's a different story again. So, and then in September of 1901, they moved to 331 Sumter Street West, and on the third floor, that's where they had a lodging. Unfortunately, the building was destroyed by fire, but thanks to Barry Podolsky, it was rebuilt, and it looks fairly much the same as it did before. And if you pass by, you will see the plaque declaring that Mackenzie King lived in that house. And this is the room, Harper Bird's room in the apartment that they had on the third floor on Somerset. And I just wanted to digress for a little bit. When Mackenzie King was quite young, when he was in university, younger brother died, and he was away from home when that happened, and he took it very much to heart that it was not there when the death happened. Unfortunately, he was away again, and when Birth was invited to a skating party on the Ottawa River in December of 1901, and Bessie Blair, the young woman, fell through the ice, and Birth jumped after her, trying to save her, and he died. So when Mackenzie King came back to Ottawa, he found out that his good friend died while he was away. So, and in Bert's office, if you look very carefully, there is a picture of Sir Galahad. And when Mackenzie King decided to erect a statue in honor of Bert, he chose that image, and we have Sir Galahad, and we can see him still on Wellington Street in front of Parliament buildings today. He stayed on Somerset till 1910, when he moved to the Roxborough, which was advertised as the palatial Roxborough. It was across from the Cartier Square, which is where City Hall is now, and it was supposed to be the top of the state-of-the-art interiors, wood finishing, everything, plumbing, everything was supposed to be the most modern of apartment buildings. And it was designed on models of apartment buildings from New York City. And as you can see, it's an H-shape floor plan. And that allows for every single room in every unit to have a window, which meant that you could get fresh air coming in at all time, which made it very healthy and healthier than it would be otherwise. And one of the things that I like the best, the rent was about $40 a month, I believe. And I think it included maid service, because you can see that there is a maid room in every one of the apartment. Wouldn't we? I wouldn't mind that. And two very important personal things happened while he lived in the Roxborough. And the first one was that his mother, Isabella Grace King, died in the apartment in December 1917. And wouldn't you know, Mackenzie King was um, out of town, so he was not there when that happened. So that's the third death that he seemed to, like, people that were important to him that he wasn't present at. And the other important thing that happened while he was living there was that he met the Pattersons. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson were neighbors, and they gifted him with Pat, or as we know him, Pat the First. And Pat lived with Mackenzie King for a long time, and he was a very faithful companion. And not too long ago, I was at the lecture, and apparently when the Lord Elgin Hotel was being opened, Pat was dying. And Mackenzie King would not leave his side, and it made it into the paper. So I think, like, after missed three deaths, the dog got special treatment. And when Lady Laurier died in November 1921, the Liberal Party had bought the house for the Lauriers, and we'll see more of the house in a second. But in a will, she did not will it back to the party, but she specified Mackenzie King. So he actually inherited the house, not as the party, but as himself. And the house was the original house was designed by Mather, and I believe the lecture on in May is going to talk about the architect. So I'm not going to talk. I'll let you attend the lecture and find out a lot more about it. But it was built for Leslie. Um, um, John Leslie in 1878, and he was a jeweler. And this is the picture of himself and the family that lived at Laurier House. Again, again, I will not talk about too much of that part of it, but I just wanted to show you as the house as it was, because Laurier has made a lot of quite a number of additions, and the veranda was one of them. And then you see an addition to the back and the garage, and there was they did have a car, so which I believe only Zoe uh, uh, actually drove, because Laurier did not like telephones or any kind of modern inventions. And this is more like the picture of the house as we know it now. And that was the time that Mackenzie King lived there. Now, Mackenzie King was one of those people who constantly complained that he did not have enough money. He befriended Peter Larkin, who was the head. He had the Salada tea company, and you might know him well with a connection to Canada House in London. He was a very big collector of objet d'art, and he had very good taste in furnishing. And he gave money to Laurier, but he also helped him decorate the house. So there was quite a lot, quite a number of objets d'art in the house that were actually supplied by Larkin. And one of the things I found rather interesting, that at the dining room above the fireplace, I would think that the picture of his mother was there. Instead, he has Larkin um, in the place of honor, which I guess indicates his relationship to the man. And again, this is the living room or the parlor, and you can see quite a number of knickknacks. I'm not sure if you could call them knickknacks because there are art pieces, but nevertheless, there's quite a lot of objects that Larkin supplied. Of course, the study on the upstairs is one of the most famous room because that's where um, Mackenzie King spent a lot of his time writing and running the country. I'm always wondering how much of help Pat actually gave him in running the country. And I just wanted to mention that there were three Pats. That's why I called Pat the first, because once Pat died, he got another dog, the same kind, and it was Pat 2. But Pat 2 was not very healthy, so he got Pat 3 and, to replace Pat 2 in case something happened to Pat 2, and Pat 2 died, and Pat 3 actually outlived Mackenzie King. And this is where you'll find the picture of his mother, who is very influential in his life. And I'm not sure if it's there. The last time I went, actually, it was not quite in that corner. The painting was not in that corner. And in front of it was a crystal ball and a little box, a silver box with a lock of her hair and a wedding ring in it sitting there. So, and that brings me to Saint Laurent, and close to the end. And Saint Laurent became the prime minister at the end of the war, after the Second World War, and he moved to Ottawa, and he moved to the Roxborough apartment, which, if you remember, that's where Mackenzie King lived. But by the time Saint Laurent moved in, it was described as a flea bag. And apparently his refrigerator was in the closet. And when Mrs. Saint Laurent would come and visit him, she would bring a hot plate so she can actually cook him breakfast and a few other things. So it was not quite a palatial apartment building that it started off as. And just to show you the outside of it. And I did go out last month and took a picture with all the snow. And so you can see what the corner of the apartment building was like. And you can see that the Lord Elgin is not up yet. Now, Mrs. Saint Laurent did not want to move to Ottawa because they had this beautiful house in Quebec City, and she much preferred staying there rather than coming to Ottawa. But in 1946, the government did expropriate the 24 Sussex. They did give the Edwards, who owned the house at the time, $140,000 plus expenses, and they took over the house, not knowing what they were going to do with it. There was no clear indication as to what was going to happen to it. There were few it was occupied by different things. I'm not going to talk too much about 24 Sussex because this is not what I'm doing, but nevertheless, they decided to make it the official residence, and they told Saint Laurent that that was what's going to happen. He did not want it. He did not want to move there, and he said the only way he was going to move into 24 Sussex was if he was going to pay rent, and the rent was $5,000 a year. And I just put these two together just to show you like the before and after, trying to align what actually was the old house and the new one. Apparently there was wallpaper with chrysanthemum on it. And when Mrs. Saint Laurent came in, she said, "I'm not going to live here." She believed that the suppliers provided things for the house that they could not sell otherwise. The whole had been papered with these giant chrysanthemums, and to reminiscing of Oscar Wilde, who said on his deathbed, "This wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. Either it goes or I do." Madame Saint Laurent said she could not live with the wallpaper. In her case, the chrysanthemum was left, and the Saint Laurent eventually did move in. And I'm just going to go very quick through the house just to show you what the furnishing were like at the time when the Saint Laurent moved in. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Hagit. That was
Thank
a
you.
wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
And it was the right balance of historical factuality and spicy gossip.
Well, we
I
have to have that.
suspect, yeah, I suspect you had learned a whole lot of other
Yep.
things.
Oh, yeah.
The poor, the poor lady from Napanee, honestly, what a cad.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as you notice in the newspaper, they said she had gone to actually sue him for breach of promise.
And that was the thing then, because
Yeah. Oh,
a proposal of
yeah.
marriage was a contract.
Well, that was the thing. I would love to know why he canceled it, and but
Well,
I
he
guess
was no gentleman.
I
Let's
guess
put it that
not.
way. Oh, yeah. So we have a question about where Victoria Street is, and that's curious. It's not Victoria Street,
No, it's
it's
Victoria.
Victoria.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
as I showed on the map, it's where the Supreme Court of Canada is.
that's right. So it's a
Uh,
street that doesn't exist anymore,
it
in
doesn't.
effect.
It was
Yeah.
all, as I said, it was all expropriated. So it's very close to the corner of Kent and Wellington. If you go towards the river, the next street you would have come to was Victoria.
Yeah. So that whole brow,
Yeah,
which was once an avenue of posh homes
yeah,
looking over the river,
yeah, yeah,
was bit by bit taken over
yeah,
for government
yeah,
properties.
yeah.
Yes, that's right. Do you have plans on doing a volume two of where prime ministers lived, or after, they were officially at 24
Yeah,
Sussex, but they're
yeah,
also associated with a lot of other properties over the
yeah,
years, like uh, the places where they lived when they were leaders of the opposition or when they were
yeah.
senior politicians. For instance, we have one question, uh did Paul Martin ever live at 274 Daily? I don't know whether.
Uh, well, that's my 12 prime ministers and at San Rosa. I never really looked at anybody after because once the idea was to know where they lived before 24 Sussex became the official residence. After that, what I'm actually looking at right now is their home, in their home where they like, like for example, for me, and I went to St. Mary's. He lived in Toronto. I'm planning on going to look at the house there. I'm still concentrating on this 12 because after spending so much time with them, they're I keep calling them my prime ministers because I feel so close to them. I feel like I know them really well. So I find I'm not sure if an expansion could be made actually to see where other prime ministers lived before they became prime ministers. That's a possibility.
I worked on houses of prime ministers while I was a research
Yeah,
historian at Parks Canada,
yeah,
and the question kept coming up, well, why don't we have a program of designating houses of prime ministers
yeah,
af as the Americans do for American
yeah.
presidents? And we kept having to point out Canadians move a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
A- And I found again the times where those buildings were coming down. It was really before heritage became at the forefront of the conscious of our attention in a way, because they were all in the 60s or the 20s, like they were all being um, demolished, which I find very sad because we really didn't keep very much. But that was it was a reflection of the time. And as I said, with 22 Victoria, when you consider that almost three prime ministers lived in it, and yet no attention was paid into trying and keep, preserve it. And even with Tupper's house, as I mentioned, it was recognized of historical importance on the municipal level and federal level. And yet, when they gave permission for the Embassy Hotel to be built, which is really sad. But that's and of me and lived down the street from Tupper on Cooper Street, and his house was demolished as well. So we just kept losing one after the other.
Well, and which raises an interesting point. There is no legal protection
Yeah,
for National Historic
yeah,
Sites of Canada.
yeah. I
And
know.
we're
I, You're preaching to the to the
I'm preaching
converted.
to the converted. Yeah. So, but our audience may be interested in knowing that the Historic Places of Canada Act
Yeah.
is going to die with this Parliament.
Yeah.
So we're hoping they reintroduce it in the new
Yeah.
Parliament, and then
Yeah.
places like Bellevue House, and
Yeah. Yeah.
one of Sir Johnny Macdonald's many houses. My
Yeah.
goodness, the guy moved
Yeah.
around a lot.
Yeah. And
It
that's
could be
why,
torn down
yeah.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, I found that's why partly why I didn't include him, because he moved so much in Ottawa. We could have had a lecture just on the houses that Sir John A. Macdonald lived in. And I thought I didn't want to spend all my time with him.
No.
So I
And he
thought,
lived in many places in Kingston too.
yeah, I know he moved a lot. So to preserve all the houses and I think Earnscliffe partly was preserved because it was bought by um, the British High Commission.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it had stayed in government hands, it might have suffered the same fate as
Yeah.
24 Sussex.
I think so, yeah. I'm sorry I didn't mention that when I showed the photograph, but I was hoping people would know what Earnscliffe was.
Yeah, and I'm sure most people knew it. It's unfortunately crowded out by the bridge
Yeah,
and by the new chancery, but there
yeah,
you go.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
going forward, do you have a new research project underway, Hagit, that you
Uh,
can
uh,
share with us?
Not really. No, I'm in between things now. So I figured I'll take a little bit of a breather, and I find the books come up. In my case, they came up quite by chance, in a sense.
Mhm.
And this particular one was I'm- I went to visit Pearson's burial place in Wakefield, and I noticed that Mary, his wife, had a foot stone rather than a headstone. And the last time I went, it was all covered. And my thought was, I was thinking about the wives of the prime ministers. And that's when the question came up is, where did they live? And that's how the book was born.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because I thought, well, nobody actually wrote about it. Like, we just sort of know a little bit here and there, but nobody really did a full. So I figured something is going to trigger the next book, but I'm not sure what it is.
Well, I wanted to follow up on your comments about William Lyon Mackenzie King,
Yeah,
because on one hand, he's living in a very traditional building
yeah,
on Laurier Avenue East, but then at the same time, he has this fantasy property, which is now in Gatineau Park
yeah,
with the romantic
yeah,
ruins. And
yeah,
but there's a link. There's his uh belief in the
yeah,
afterlife,
yeah,
his seances,
yeah,
and this extraordinary property with
yeah.
the shards of. Would you like to expand on that a little bit? What it
Not,
says about him?
not really, because one of the thing is because I got a grant from the city of Ottawa. I stayed in the city of Ottawa. I did not expand to other things. I love Kingsmere, and I think Peter did a really nice job about explaining a lot of things about in Kingsmere. But it just I found well, as I said with Mackenzie King, I found him a um, very hard to understand in a lot of ways, because as you said, like, as I said, he always complained that he didn't have money, and yet he had all this property in Kingsmere, and he lived there, like, the way he did. But also, like, his the seances, like, he was very much and as I said, the crystal ball, I did mention that, because he really believed in the afterlife, in all the spiritual things. And he did, I think he tried to evoke spirits to come into his aid. So, and I think Kingsmere really reflects that a lot more than the house in, although apparently he did have a room in Laurier House where he used to have all the seances. And it, and the other thing I found with Kingsmere, his connection to his mom. Like, he had, he had a special room for his mother, and apparently she haunts that place. So, again, that's an that's another study. One can keep going.
Sounds like there's a lot of potential for things like theater nights inside
Yeah,
these places
yeah,
and modern seances.
yeah. Oh, that would be lovely.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
And we do have one person answering the question about did Paul Martin live in 274 Daly? And the answer is yes. And we have another question. Thank
Yeah.
you for a wonderful presentation. Would you happen to know why Canada designated one official residence for the Prime Minister, yet two for the Governor General? So the Governor General's official properties
Yeah.
are at Rideau Hall and the Citadel in Quebec.
Yeah.
Whereas, well, the official residence for the Prime Minister has been 24 Sussex, but
Yeah.
also I believe that there's a sort of a summer property
Yes,
identified. Yeah,
there is the farm, which I believe is for the Speaker of the House, and
right.
the Prime Minister has a summer a cottage on the other side in Gatineau. So
That's right.
there's 7 official residences altogether. So I believe it's 7 if I in Ottawa in the area, and then there's the Citadel in Quebec City.
Mhm.
So there's more than one official residence here. But what I found actually more interesting is that the official opposition had an official residence before the Prime Minister did. That's
Mhm.
what I would find more interesting.
And one question is, since many parliamentarians were only in Ottawa when Parliament was sitting, including some prime ministers, was it usual for a sitting prime minister, one of the earlier ones, to just be in Ottawa for the sitting of Parliament, or would they generally stay put in Ottawa? Or
My understanding is that they stayed put.
okay,
As ministers, and as I mentioned in my introduction, as ministers, they would only come for the 4 months, and they stayed in boarding houses or hotel because their wives stayed, or the family stayed behind if they were married and had a family. But from what I gather as a prime minister, they lived here the whole time. They did not, they sort of closed their own writing and moved everything to Ottawa. And
yes, because they had work to do whether Parliament was
yeah,
sitting or not.
yeah, yeah, and that's why I said too. And I found from my understanding as well is that entertaining took a lot of their budget as well, because it was not only during Parliament, but they were entertaining all the time, like more quite quite frequently.
Now, where can we purchase your book, Hagit?
Well, they're all on my shelf here, so you can contact me and I'll be happy to sell your book and manage to get it to you somehow.
Well, and which brings me to the next point, and that is to say to everyone, if you have supplementary questions for Hagit, we're getting close to winding up.
Yeah.
Please send them to info@heritageottawa.org, including requests for her book, and we will forward them to Hagit and make sure that you get them. And I'm just going to thank you again, Hagit, for your wonderful presentation. My
My
goodness,
pleasure.
it really was just a taste of,
Yeah,
I see a future
yeah. There's a lot of there's
Downton
a lot more.
Abbey,
Yeah, but
scandal on the
yeah,
Rideau.
but I for the presentation, because of the time constraints, the book covers a lot more. So if you want to know more, do read the book. So,
It was
because,
tantalizing, yes,
well,
for sure.
I just as I said, when I didn't want to keep people till 2 o'clock in the morning, so I had to to pick and choose. But there's a lot more to the story. So, and I do encourage people to read other books as well, like to find out about. But um, not there's not as much as I'd like about the personal life rather than their official, like their political life.
Mhm.
But it's there.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Hagit.
My pleasure.
And before we wind up tonight, I just want to let everyone know that April's lecture will be presented by Jean-Marc Blais, Président, Musée Régional de l'Outaouais, and Stephen Quick, the museum's Director General. That's the Regional Museum of the Outaouais. The lecture will be on the 16th of April, be presented in a bilingual format, and it will provide insight into the dual opportunity to share the rich history of the Outaouais while at the same time preserving and rehabilitating the E.B. Eddy factory buildings to house the museum. And you can now register for this event on the Heritage Ottawa website at heritageottawa.org. And so thank you again. And just to remind you that our Heritage Ottawa's lectures are provided free of charge. And we encourage you to join Heritage Ottawa if you're not yet a member, and to donate to the organization to help continue efforts to share heritage stories. And my goodness, have we heard wonderful stories tonight. There's more information on the Heritage Ottawa website. And thank you again, Hagit, and thank you everyone for your attendance this evening. It's been lots of fun. Good night.